Hi, it's Anna Mason, and in this watercolour tip video I wanted to show you how I paint these plums with their powdery bloom without using any white paint. Instead, I use the white of the paper showing through watery paint to create them. If you try to use white paint to add the bloom, you just don't get as bright results as if you'd let the paper do the work of whitening. So I start by creating a drawing where I map out in pencil the most prominent areas of bloom. Then, after painting the lightest colours within the shadow and the stalks, I mixed a watery purple grey which was a match to the lightest colours within the areas of bloom on the plum. I deliberately painted these areas of bloom bigger than they needed to be, painting outside of the pencil boundaries to the bloom that I'd marked in. I did this so that with each subsequent layer I'd be able to work into the patches of bloom and add texture without making the patches of bloom too small in the process. Next, I painted in watery light versions of the other colours I could see in the plum, from brownish pinks to purple crimsons. Already I used a small brush and began to add a feathered texture with little lines along the transitions into the bloom areas, as well as stippling and creating texture where I could see it within the bigger patches of bloom too. Next, once that layer was dry, I created a much thicker mix that was a match to the darkest tones in the plum's skin and applied it everywhere that was this colour, watering the mix down to lighten it a little for working on the darker mid-tones, but continuing to make lots of line brush strokes to add texture to the transition into the areas of bloom and stippling into the bigger areas of bloom, leaving plenty of gaps through to the bloom colour underneath. Again, I changed the colour of the mix to reflect the different colours within the plum skin, including watering down the mix to ensure I wasn't working too dark as I worked into the lighter mid-tones. Getting the tonal balance right is crucial to getting the form and the shape of the plums right, and with the full tonal range painted, by this stage the plums have already got a good shape. But with all this darkening, I could now see that the bloom colour I'd painted at the start was looking too pale in comparison to the rest of the plum skin in most places. So with the layer underneath dry, I painted another layer onto the bloom areas, being gentle with my brush so as not to disturb too much of the texture I'd painted before. With that tonal adjustment made, I needed to adjust the darkest tones too with another dark layer to them, and all the while I continued to add texture to the transitions into the bloom areas with my brush. Next, I worked on the mid-tones, altering between using the bigger brush to focus on creating bigger tonal patches which have an important effect on the form of the plum, and using my smallest brush to add even more texture to the bloom as I darken. I then adjusted the different colours within the plum, darkening them and paying close attention to the textures within them. Then finally, once that was dry, I could darken some of the areas of bloom again, focusing on those towards the bottom where the plum was in shadow so that the curved form of the plum was accentuated. With that dry, I added even more texture, and then after working on the shadow and stalks some more, I made a few more adjustments to the darkest tones and bloom, and the plums were finished. A full video class of these plums is available now in my online school. If you've enjoyed this tip video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'd love it if you'd share this video with your friends. And if you'd like to take one of my tried and tested video classes for free, click on over to annamasonart.com where you'll find even more resources to help you pick up your brush and paint the way you've always wanted to. Remember, you won't improve your painting unless you make the time to paint, so be sure to schedule in some me time this week and paint something that you love. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon with another tip for creating watercolours with wow. Ooh, what a lovely pair of palms!